South African President Jacob Zuma reassured an uneasy nation on Tuesday that former President Nelson Mandela was receiving the best of attention from the best doctors in the country. He, however, insisted the 94-year-old is still in serious condition. Jane Keo has more details.
We are all feeling it that our president...
In a televised statement, President Jacob Zuma said he met the team of doctors treating Nelson Mandela for a recurring lung infection and was satisfied that the doctors were, quote, doing their best to make Mandela better.
Whilst it's very serious, but he's stabilized. And we are all praying for him really to recuperate quickly. We need him to be with us. And I'm sure all the messages that have been pouring in to wish him quick, speedy recovery, they are highly welcomed. But that also indicates the love of our people to him. And we certainly join everyone to say he should recover quickly. And I'm sure, knowing him as I do, he's a good fighter, he will be with us very soon.
Mandela's relatives streamed to the Mediclinic Heart Hospital in Pretoria to be at his bedside as fears grew over his condition. Security was tightened around the private facility where a dozen armed police stood guard outside and incoming vehicles and pedestrians were searched amid a heavy media presence. Mandela's latest health scare has been met with a growing acceptance among South Africans. He has a long history of lung problems since being diagnosed with early-stage tuberculosis in 1988. This is his fourth hospital stay since December. 2 months ago, Mandela, who turns 95 next month, was discharged after treatment of pneumonia.
So help me God.
Mandela became the first black leader of the country after historic all-race elections in 1994. Mandela has not been seen in public since the World Cup final in South Africa in July 2010 and has not been politically active for years. Jane Keo, CCTV.
Well, let's get the latest on Nelson Mandela's current state. We're joined by CCTV's Guy Henderson live from Pretoria, where South Africa's former president will be spending his 5th night in hospital. Guy, we understand Mandela has been responding more positively to his treatment for a lung infection. Has any more detail been given about the state of his health?
Well, yes, on Wednesday, South African President Jacob Zuma used a phrase that's quite often popped up in previous presidential statements, those carefully worded statements that come out of the presidency when these health scares take place, but a phrase that during this most recent health scare we hadn't seen used in either of those first 3 statements. But today in Parliament, Jacob Zuma said the words responding to treatment, and that is being taken as an extremely positive sign here. Early days, of course, and indeed Jacob Zuma did also say that these had been extremely difficult past few days, that it had been a difficult period. And that does give you perhaps an insight into some of the genuine anxiety that particularly hospital officials and obviously the family would have been feeling. But as of this morning, it does appear that he is responding to treatment. That's not to say he's out of the woods, of course. He's 94 years old, about to be 95. He is still suffering from pneumonia, but this is the first good news that we've had, really, since he was first admitted to hospital on Saturday.
Guy, it's a rather anxious moment there in South Africa. Can you describe for us the general mood out there?
Well, it has been extremely anxious. I think now there is cautious optimism. It is obviously early days, and this is only the first statement, so we're not sure of too many details at this stage, but certainly early positive signs. It's not as if life has stopped here. People are continuing to go about their daily life, but it has been a daily life that has had somewhat of a shadow over it since he was admitted to hospital on Saturday. I do think, though, that South Africans are becoming increasingly resilient to these health scares, and the possibility that at some point there may be a South Africa without the presence of Nelson Mandela. When South Africans speak about Mandela, they often cite the fact that he has been this tremendous example to South Africa, to the world, his leadership qualities, his principled approach. That, of course, isn't something that will that is something that will live well beyond Nelson Mandela himself, of course.
All right, CCTV's Guy Henderson updating us there on the health status of Nelson Mandela. Well, do stay with us here on Africa Live, as we still have more news, views and analysis for you, including tension over the Nile. Ethiopia dismisses Cairo's approach to the Nile water crisis. And Sudan now formally warns South Sudan on its intention to shut down the crude oil pipeline.
Breaking news. Global trends. CCTV News brings you stories with the different aspects of Africa in the international content. With our reporters across Africa and all over the world, we'll tell you about the real Africa and how it impacts the world. Africa Live, every day, only on CCTV News.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need a trade justice.
Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life.
We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world. Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn has dismissed insinuations from Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi that Cairo would go to war over the waters of the River Nile. Responding to President Morsi's apparent threats, Haile Mariam Desalegn said it would not be in the interest of the two countries to go to war, but in the event war becomes inevitable, then Ethiopia has the might to defend herself. Here is CCTV's Girum Chala.
Ethiopia dismissed Egyptian politicians' talk of military action against a giant dam it is building on the Nile as psychological warfare, and said on Tuesday it would defend itself and carry on with the work regardless.
በእኛ እምነት ካላበዱ በስተቀር
We believe unless they are mad, they won't take the option of war to resolve this situation.
ከኢትዮጵያ በላይ የጦርነትን አስከፊነትና ጉዳት የሚያውቅ ሰው የለም።
Belligerent rhetoric between two of Africa's most populous and fastest growing nations has raised fears of conflict over water. So both sides are also pursuing diplomatic compromise over what would be the biggest hydroelectric plant on the continent. Responding to a speech on Monday by President Mohamed Morsi, in which he said Egypt did not want war but would keep all options open to avoid losing any water, Ethiopia's foreign ministry spokesman said this sort of bragging won't divert our attention.
Any trial to slow or stop the construction of the dam either by Egypt or any other party has no place whatsoever. The trial of the Renaissance Dam is an excuse to resolve internal problems, will not protect Egypt's or Ethiopia's sustainable benefits.
The spokesman, Dina Mufti, added Ethiopia is not intimidated by Egypt's psychological warfare and won't halt the dam's construction even for seconds. On the other hand, because the two governments have genuine interest of resolving their differences via roundtable discussions, things may not go out of hand. Grumjala, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, the African Union Commission chairperson Dlamini Zuma says the organization believes war is not a solution for the problem between Ethiopia and Egypt over the Nile waters. Zuma is instead calling for talks between the two nations, which will result in a win-win situation.
We think it's possible to have discussions and to come to an agreement that will not harm any part, because both countries need the water. Both countries need to use the Nile. And I think it would be important to just have discussions that are open, that look at how we can have a win-win situation in a new context, not in the context of the colonial powers, but in the context of Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance. And I think if we discuss in that context, we should be able to find a solution. We have not approached any of the countries yet. One of the presidents had discussed the matter with us not so long ago, but it was before this wave, just saying, will the AU be willing to discuss it? And we were waiting for the summit to pass and then to talk to all the parties concerned.
Tensions are rising once again between Sudan and South Sudan. Sudan officially informed Juba on Tuesday that it would freeze oil and economic agreements and hold South Sudan's exporting of crude oil through its territory within 2 months, unless it ended what Khartoum says is support for insurgents operating across their shared border. Now, South Sudan denies backing any rebels, but the country's oil minister says his country would abide by Sudan's decision. However, with Sudan likely to suffer huge economic losses if it closes the export pipelines, some doubt it will follow through. The United States has also stepped in and asked Sudan to reconsider. Well, activities of a rebel coalition, the Sudan Revolutionary Front, are a source of concern for the government in Khartoum. The group staged its first offensive in central Sudan late April. It was the rebels' closest attack to the capital, which until then had been restricted to southern and eastern Sudan. The SRF claim they now control a southern stretch of the country. Clementine Logan takes a look at recent developments and what threat they pose.
The Sudan Revolutionary Front rebel coalition says it's a new force to be reckoned with. Their April 27th attack on Sudanese forces was the first offensive launched in central Sudan and the closest they've gotten to the capital, Khartoum. Less than a week later, the SRF declared war on the government. Now, the group, which says it's fighting under a unified political leadership, claims to hold a southern stretch of the country. The SRF is made up of insurgent groups from the western region of Darfur, as well as South Kordofan and Blue Nile states in South Sudan. The SRF wants to install an inclusive transitional government of national unity, along with a decentralized federal system based on a secular constitution. It's also pledged to hand over Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, who's been indicted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. They believe a new political blueprint that addresses the grievances of marginalized communities, particularly over land, will lead to stability. A February report by the International Crisis Group suggested the SRF's creation could help bring local negotiations to the national level. But so far, talks between the rebels and Khartoum have ended in deadlock, and now SRF troops in North Kordofan have warned the government of more attacks. However, with resources stretched thin and faced with better equipped government troops, it remains to be seen if the SRF can sustain fighting in different areas at the same time. With a new front emerging in North Kordofan, fears have also been raised over civilians bearing the brunt of the government crackdown against the SRF that's likely to ensue. Clementine Logan, CCTV.
And we'll take another break here on Africa Live, but still ahead on the program. A glimmer of hope. Tuareg rebels in Mali inches away from signing a peace deal. And European Union officials tour Somalia ahead of a Brussels conference.
Africa, an amazing world, is coming closer to us. A new voice.
We have made an excellent beginning.
A new view. Let's watch together. We deliver news and views. Let's explore together. We get you inside real Africa. Every day, only on CCTV News.
Make major investments in China.
In China,
seriously, why we are living for?
That's a fundamental government
position on China's
for
by our leaders.
I think that's first would be
have a dialogue, political change and human rights. Don't you think you change human rights?
Dialogue. Ideas matter.
International news with the global perspective. World Insight is the only program with analysis from around the world, with lively discussions and feature reports. Tuning each week for World Insight, only on CCTV News.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Tuareg rebels in Mali on Tuesday said they were ready to sign a deal that would pave way for Bamako to hold nationwide polls next month. But the interim authorities demanded further amendments. The election is seen as a key step in Mali's recovery from a crisis that saw Al-Qaeda-linked groups take over the northern half of the country for 9 months on the back of a March 2012 coup. Rebels from the MNLA and HCUA groups want autonomy from the northern Tuareg homeland they call Azawad. France, which sent in troops in January this year to stop the Islamist militants threatening to advance on the capital, has supported the interim administration's July 28th election target. The draft accord was submitted to both sides on Tuesday by Burkinabe President Blaise Compaoré, who was appointed lead mediator by the regional body ECOWAS. Well, it is not known how many children there are with disabilities in Mali, but based on international estimates, there may be as many as 500,000. According to Musa Sanogo, a headmaster of the School of Hope in Mali, a lot of handicapped children suffer rejection and discrimination. Despite the fact that cases of discrimination are on the decline, thousands of other disabled children in developing countries still remain in the shadows.
These children have the same rights. And we have to identify them, we have to know where they are, we have to support their families, we have to support their communities, we have to bring them where the children should be. And the children, they have to be at school, they have to play together, they have to grow and they have to learn, and they have to be citizens.
Let's turn our attention to the Horn of Africa region now, where as part of European Union's diplomatic and security engagements in Somalia, the European Union ambassadors visited the Somali capital, Mogadishu, to assess the EU training mission and fast-track preparations ahead of a conference in the European Union bloc's headquarters this autumn. The September Brussels conference on Somalia will be chaired by both the European Union's Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton and the Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud.
A European Union delegation led by the permanent chair of the EU Political and Security Committee, Ambassador Olof Skog, arrived in Mogadishu to visit EU's training mission in Mogadishu. The EU delegation then held a series of security and political meetings with the Somali president ahead of the EU-organized Brussels conference in September.
We are intensifying our preparations for the conference that will take place in Brussels in September, and a lot of work needs to be done until then.
The Brussels conference is expected to galvanize further support for Somalia as part of the international community's approach to stabilize the Horn of Africa.
On behalf of the Somali people, I have thanked to the delegation on the unwavering support that the European Union has always been giving to Somalia, particularly in the difficult days. With the support of the European Union, many Somali lives have been saved, and many more has been given a hope in the future. We very much appreciate.
Earlier this year, EU ministers agreed to extend an EU mission to train Somali soldiers for another 2 years at a cost of 11 million euros.
We are also here today to visit our training mission. As you know, the European Union has been very active over the years to train the Somali security forces. And it's very symbolically important that that training is now carried out in the soil of Somalia.
The EU training mission was launched in 2010 and has since trained 3,000 Somali troops. The EU training mission is aimed to contribute to the strengthening of the Somali national force to prepare them to ultimately take over full security responsibility. A strong United Nations mandated 17,000 African Union troops now provide security in the country. Mohamed Hirmogi, CCTV, Mogadishu.
A senior United Nations humanitarian official on Tuesday appealed for urgent support to tackle the ongoing food and nutritional crisis in the Sahel region of West Africa and respond to the needs of 11.4 million people facing food insecurity. Robert Piper, the UN Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the Sahel, told a news conference in New York that despite improved conditions, the region is still facing multiple crises.
Despite much better rains in 2012 coming into 2013, despite better harvest projections for many countries in the region, we have multiple crises once again this year. Mali, you're following very closely, it's very well acknowledged, is reeling from a double crisis. The man-made crisis, the conflict that is waging there, that has displaced more people, created more refugees. But also, of course, Mali itself reeling from the aftermath of last year's drought and dealing with very high food insecurity problems as well.
Well, Libya's interim army chief of staff has reiterated the government's commitment to dealing with militias in the country. Speaking in the eastern city of Benghazi, where deadly clashes left 31 people dead over the weekend, Colonel Salem Kinedi said the militias will eventually have to lay down their arms or join the military by the year end. Meanwhile, 3 days after the bloody clashes, the security situation in the surrounding area remains volatile.
3 days after bloody clashes erupted at the Libya Shield Brigade's camp, dozens of soldiers patrol the camp in case of an emergency. The 100,000 square meter camp is in a total mess. Building walls are adorned with bullet holes. Burnt cars lay everywhere, and every so often, bursts of smoke can be seen coming out of the building. According to security officers, on the night of the conflict, angry crowds stormed the barracks and set it on fire. Detainees who were being held at the camp's prison escaped.
This is a prison. Anyone they catch, they put them in here.
So these militias, do they have the right to do it?
They don't have the authority to do that. The only right is to soldiers. Only the police have the right to put people in jail.
When fighting erupted, the National Army removed tanks and other weapons from the camp, leaving the weapons and ammunition warehouse empty.
We are protecting the place now in compliance with number 47 General National Congress of Libya. We will take care of the place until they give us further instructions. We are here to serve the Benghazi citizens who ask for national police and army only.
Violence erupted on June the 8th when protesters in Benghazi, the country's second largest city, stormed the main camp of Libya Shield. The protesters were demanding that the militia submit to the full authority of Libya's security forces or lay down their arms. Susan Mongeli, CCTV.
Several people have been wounded after clashes broke out at Egypt's Culture Ministry, where artists were holding demonstrations. Prominent filmmakers, writers and performers were demonstrating against what they see as the Muslim Brotherhood takeover of cultural institutions. Susan Mongeli has more on that story.
Clashes broke outside the Cairo ministry between supporters of President Morsi and a group of artists who have been camping at the ministry for days. The artists accused Morsi's new culture minister of sacking respected officials with the intention of filling key posts with supporters. Riot police moved in to separate the protesters from hundreds of Morsi supporters who gathered on one side of the street. 3 police officers were wounded, as were several members of the crowd.
The corrupt state that existed under Mubarak still exists, and we can't deny that there's corruption in all the institutions of state, including the Ministry of Culture. But this is just a course that they're abusing. Why? Because as soon as he was appointed, he brought with him the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood and the instructions of Khairat al-Shater and the guidance. He wants to cull the leadership of the arts institutions so that the leadership he puts in place afterwards will carry out the instructions of the Muslim Brotherhood in destroying Egyptian culture.
Islamist protester Esmat El Sawi, a member of the strict Salafi Building Development Party, said he had come to support the minister.
In reality, supporting Dr. Ala Abdelaziz has become a necessity at the present time, and particularly because he has arrived after a very long period of corruption at the Ministry of Culture. Farouk Hosni ruined cultural life for ordinary Egyptians and brought down the ministry. He made it exclusive to a certain section of Egyptian society.
The culture minister has rejected accusations that he is trying to Islamicize the arts. Last week, the protesters released a statement saying their objection to the minister was not personal. Rather, they took exception to his affiliation with the Muslim Brotherhood, which, according to them, is attempting to change the artistic life in Egypt. Susan Mongeli, CCTV.
Well, let's return briefly to South Africa and bring you an update on the health status of Nelson Mandela, where it's been another tense day as the nation held its breath waiting for official updates about the health of former President Nelson Mandela. Here is Renee Delcam with more.
Wednesday marked the historic 49th anniversary of Nelson Mandela's sentencing to life imprisonment in 1964. And it coincided with his 5th consecutive day in hospital, battling a serious recurring lung infection. Like millions of South Africans, Moloko Molome of Johannesburg said he was anxious about Madiba's medical condition and said the headlines about his hero's poor health were heartbreaking.
I feel sad because I'm going to lose him. But anyway, even God, when he needs him, he gonna take him.
Outside the Mandela home in Houghton, Johannesburg, neighbors stopped by with cards and flowers to pay their respects to the ailing former president and to thank him for what he has meant to generations of people in South Africa and beyond.
I think Mandela is such an icon for every South African that is around, and we've all been touched by this. We all know that he's not well. We felt it was just the smallest gesture we could do by just coming here and letting our children have a chance to just pay their respects as well.
He is your former president. He is your native son. But there's a part of Nelson Mandela that is loved by the entire world. The world is watching this story, cares about Nelson Mandela, because I think his courage has allowed each one of us to rise into becoming a better human being.
South African President Jacob Zuma said in Parliament that the nation's thoughts and prayers were with Madiba and his family at this time. He thanks people around the world for their support during the past few difficult days. He said it was an honor for South Africa to share Madiba with the international community. And as concern grows over Nelson Mandela's health, so too does the size of the global media contingent outside the hospital, where the elderly statesman had been rushed to early on Saturday morning. Renata Calm, CCTV, Pretoria.